Hello everyone, I'm Samin Umar and inshallah I will take us through Module 5 of GSP 1202/2202, which is use of library study skills and ICT. And Module 5 deals with the listening process, barriers to effective listening, and note taking. This module has 5 important learning objectives, which are as follows. At the end of this module, inshallah, students should be able to firstly identify the fundamental processes involved in active listening. Secondly, students should be able to understand the major obstacles to effective listening. Thirdly, students should be able to learn how to overcome the barriers to effective listening. Fourthly, students should also be able to appreciate the importance of active listening to effective learning. And fifthly, students, inshallah, should be able to acquire basic skills for effective note-taking. Now, what is listening? Listening is the process of intentionally giving attention to a sound or action. And when listening, a person hears what others are saying or what sound they are making, and at the same time tries to understand what it means. The active listening involves 3 important complex processes involving affective, cognitive, and behavioral. According to Prager 2003, there are 4 important elements or levels of listening. Number 1, attention, which means focused perception of both visual and verbal stimuli. This simply means that for effective listening to take place, a listener must pay attention to what is being said and the visuals that is taking place, including non-verbal communications, body language, and others. Secondly, hearing. This involves the psychological act of opening the gate of your ears. After attention, the person now hears what is being said or the sounds that is being made. And thirdly is understanding. And this is assigning meaning to the messages or sounds received. And lastly, remembering. And this is about storing the meaningful information with view to remembering at a later time. What this is simply saying is that for effective listening to take place, in the first place, person must pay attention and also to hear and also to understand, and that is what will allow him or her to remember at a later time. For example, during the exam. Types of listening. There are different types of listening, but for the context of this lecture, we are going to discuss about 4 important types of listening. The first one is informational or informative listening. And this is the type of listening which the listener pays attention to the message with view to having important information. For example, a student listening to the lecturer taking the lecture, or person or group of people listening to news. Such type of listening is intended to have an important information that will be used for either decision making or for writing exams. Secondly, we have appreciative listening, and this is the type of listening in which the listener intentionally pays attention to the sound or piece of information because of the pleasure he or she stand to derive. And for example, listening to the music or listening to sport commentary or anything in which the listener has an interest in it. And thirdly, we have critical, analytical, or evaluative listening. And this is the type of listening in which the listener also intentionally pay attention to the message, but just in order to be able to criticize, evaluate, or pass judgment on what is being said. For example, a political opponent listening to his opponent making speech, for example, may be just for him to get an idea of how to criticize or attack that political opponent. And fourthly, we have discriminative listening, and this is a type of listening in which the listener interprets and assigns meaning to sound rather than the words. In other words, the listener is sensitive to attributes including rate, volume, pitch, and emphasis on the speaking. This means that sometimes people listen to what is being said, but they are taking into consideration facial expression, verbal and non-verbal type of communication with view to understand whether what the speaker is saying, he really means it or not. Now let us look at some of the characteristics or attributes of a good listener. A good listener is someone who is open-minded. He's open-minded to the message, open-minded to the speaker, without forming initial judgment or bias against the speech or the speaker. A good listener also pays attention to the message. He pays very attentive, pays a good attention to the message, and also demonstrate interest in the speaker. And this can be by making an eye contact, and maybe when an eye contact is made, a listener smiles a little or remain expressionless. A good listener also can be able, after listening to what is said, to paraphrase, restate, or summarize what the speaker says. A good listener also will always be able to provide constructive verbal and non-verbal feedback to the speaker, especially when the need arises. For example, when the question is asked by the speaker, perhaps in a lecturer-student encounter. A good listener also makes an effort to understand the speaker, even if certain difficulties are involved. A good listener also always try to be non-judgmental. He doesn't rush into passing judgment about the message or the messenger. It is important, however, to understand that there are some elements or impediments that militate against effective listening. And one of such is distraction. Distraction is always against effective listening. And distraction can be divided attention, can be probably such technologies as maybe using a smartphone when listening to a speaker, touching computers, scratching back and shoulders, and a lot of other distractions. Secondly, there is an issue of fatigue on the part of the listener. If the listener is very fatigued, he is stressed, or very hungry, chances are good listening may not take place. Thirdly, there is an issue of prejudging the speaker's argument or information. And this simply means even before the speaker reaches the conclusion, the listener passes judgment, particularly cynical judgment about the message or the speaker. There is also the issue of lack of context or commonality. When the listener lacks the basic understanding of the issue that is being discussed, then chances are he might not be able to understand very well. And sometimes this can happen if the students come to lecture very late. When they were not there when the topic is introduced, they lack contextuality or commonality. Difficulty in hearing in the part of the part of the speaker is also an impediment. What this simply means is that when the speaker has a kind of noise attachment in terms of using jargons, using big grammars, which is above the comprehension of his listeners, may also hinder effective listening. And also the issue of too much jargon on the part of the speaker, as I have just made mention, is an impediment to good listening. Good or active listening is very important. And the following are some of the importance of good listening. Number one, it allows the listener to understand the speaker very well. And good listening also helps develop relationship between listener and the speaker. This is simply saying that when a speaker is making a speech and he realizes that you are paying good attention, he really feels very happy because he understands that you respect him and you respect what he is saying, and for that he can develop interest in you. And if the encounter is based on long term, for example, lecturer-student, that pave way for developing outstanding relationship. It also helps in retaining the information in the part of the listener. Active listening helps understanding, and understanding allows the listener to memorize the message for a very long period of time. And finally, active listening also allows a listener to build very big ocean of knowledge, because he is always updating his information, and bunch of informations is what constitutes the body of knowledge. Now, what is note-taking? Note-taking is the process of writing down relevant piece of information or points from a speech or written document. There are many reasons for which note is taken, depending on the purpose for taking them. In academic context, note-taking is done mainly for two important purposes. Number one, for writing exams, and number two, for conducting a research. Now, some important strategies for effective note-taking. Number one, students are expected to write the title of the lecture when taking notes, the name of the course, and the date on top of the paper. That allows the students to remember and not get confused, especially in the period of excitement, of exams or tests. Students are also expected to listen very carefully to the introduction of each and every lecture. That allows for broader understanding of the lecture. Students are also expected to write the notes in his own words and be very brief for easy memorization. Students should also try to recognize the main or central idea in the lecture or under any topic. In any lecture, under any topic, there is what is known as the central idea or the main or important ideas. Students should always be intelligent enough to understand the main ideas and to capture them in his or her own note. Students should also write down what supports the main ideas. I mean, after the most important ideas, supporting ideas are also important for him to have the overall understanding of the lecture. Students should also pay attention to the conclusion, especially by the lecturer or the speaker. Introduction and conclusion are always important, and students should be sensitive enough to capture that. At the end of the lecture, students also should be able to ask important questions, especially anything that he or she did not understand, and that should also reflect on his note. It is also important to revise the note as quickly as possible, particularly after the lecture or when the students reach home. It's also important to revise the lecture note at least once in a week. MONSAC Ds and Ds 2003 also provide 5 bullet points for effective note-taking, and these are popularly known as 5 R's of note-taking. And these include the first R, which means record. This means that students or note-taker should do as much as possible to record what the lecture is talking about. And the second one is reduce, and that is when students reach home, library, or any place of his comfort, to now try to summarize the whole note in a way that he can easily read and understand it. And the third R is to reflect, and this is to think and read over and over what The lecturer says, but this time in the words of the student himself. This is to say that student is advised to paraphrase because this allows the idea to get well compounded in his own head. And student can do that by talking to himself or by telling a friend or colleague about the lecture in his own words. And the fourth R is to reflect. And this talk about the student to think about what he or she has learned and how it relates to other ideas in the course. And lastly, to review. And this is to spend some time to go through what the student has learned, and this has to be as frequently as possible. Abbreviation is very important element in note taking, and fundamentally there are three types of abbreviation: common abbreviations, discipline-specific abbreviations, and personal abbreviations. Now, these are important questions for the student to always reflect. What is listening? What are the elements of listening? What are the four types of listening? What are the characteristics of a good listener? What are the impediments to good listening? What is the importance of good listening? What is note taking? What are the 5 R's of note taking? What are the 3 types of preparations for note taking? And what is abbreviation? And what are the 3 types of abbreviation? These are very important questions for students to reflect and understand very well.
Thank you very much for listening.